Sawadee-kap. Hello and welcome to Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. I'm really pleased that you've decided to join us today because today is Saturday, 9 p.m. Thai time, where we study the Pali Canon in English. We have this Pali Canon in English study group where we're broadcasting out through all of our various platforms to help you to learn the Pali Canon in English. There's this book that we're studying today, at least the first half of the book. It's called Walking the Buddha's Way. This is part of the Buddha Vajana book series. It's volume 3 out of 13 books. And you can get these books online, that you can order them and I'll ship them to you, or you can just download the PDF and study it there. The way that you access that is you access it in our Facebook group under the Files menu. From there, you can download this book and the other books as well as they're being released every 2 weeks. The Facebook group is called Daily Wisdom, Walking the Path with the Buddha. And from there, it's kind of our central hub where we have a group learning program that happens on Sunday and Wednesday, where we're using this other book, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Nibbana, as our foundation of study to help you learn and progress on this path to enlightenment. And then as you progress in that program, or while you're actually learning in that program, you can also be learning in this program on Saturdays, which we call the Pali Canon in English study group, where we actually study the words of the Buddha, his actual teachings through translations of the Pali Canon. So the way we start out these classes is we start with doing meditation. And I'll just guide you in kind of a short meditation, maybe 10, 15, 20 minutes. We'll see. I never really time them. And then after we do our meditation, we will then move into taking questions on any of the chapters in this book. And these chapters can be anywhere from 1 page to a couple of pages. They're very easily digestible teachings from the Buddha, because the Pali Canon itself is 45 volumes of books, and it takes a lot of time and effort to read all of that and actually digest it, because there's these really long sutras. What this book series has done is curated kind of a Cliff Notes version, or a very potent version of the actual teachings, assimilated and extracted out of the Pali Canon based on various topics. So this is a great way to kind of get into the Pali Canon and start to understand the Buddhist teachings, because they're more digestible than maybe one of the really long sutras where there's lots of different things being discussed at one time. So if you would like to join us for meditation, you're welcome to do that. If you'd like to stick around for learning the Pali Canon in English as we go through the chapters that the group has been learning this week, then you're welcome to do that as well. So if you would like to join meditation, go ahead and take a seated position. Or if you're going to do lying or standing, you can also use that position if you like. Just get comfortable with the lower body and place your feet on the floor or crossed at your ankles. Really erect your spine so that you're engaging the muscles of the body to keep that mind active and attentive. I'm not going to give very much guidance here, because this is kind of a more intermediate program where we're kind of guiding students along in the Pali Canon, but they've already kind of studied some of the other classes that I've taught. So I teach meditation in the group learning program. This is more of just kind of meditating before we actually learn. So erect that spine and keep the muscles engaged. Close the eyes and just start breathing in through the nose and out through the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Focus the mind on the breath. Just bring the mind and fixate it on the sound of the breath, or the sensation of the air moving over the skin into the nose. Breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. I'm going to do some chanting to ease us into meditation, and then just do a very short guidance after that. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Bhagava Bhutang Bhagavanang Abhivatemi Savakato Bhagavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Bhagavato Savaka Sankho Sanghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Bhagava Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakhato Rogavitu Anutero Purisa Dhammasati Satatava Manusanam Bhuto Bhagavati. Should be breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. Fixate the mind on the breath, the present moment. If the mind wanders, or as the mind wanders, just cut it off, let it go. Bring the mind back to the breath. And breathing in and out. Breathing in and out. If the mind goes to the past, the future, any thoughts, ideas, perceptions, anything at all, wherever you notice the mind has wandered, cut that off, let it go. Bring the mind to the breath, the present moment. Breathing in and out. You have nowhere to go, nothing to do. No one needs you right now. Just focus on the breath. And breathing in and out. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธภะคะวาพุทธังภะคะวันตังอะภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตภะคะวะตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนภะคะวะโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสภะคะวะอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิจาจารณังสัมมุโนสัคขะโตโรกาวิตุอนุเตโรภูริสาตามาสติสัตตาตาวามานุสนังพุทโธภะคะวาติ Okay, you guys would like to slowly come out of meditation. Just kind of ease the mind out. Today we're going to be studying this book, Walk the Buddha's Way. This is part of the Buddha Vajrayana book series. Its subtitle is An Anthology of Dhamma, Revealing the Hidden. So within these 13 books, we have a real nice collection of some of the most important teachings of the Buddha. And this week, students were reading or will read the first 22 chapters. And then next week, read the remaining. And we'll cover those next Saturday. I would like to bring your attention to something now that we're moving into some new books based on some of the language that I'm seeing in the books, because I'm moving these books through scanning them into PDF format, and then I'm updating some of the translations to make them more applicable to today's language. And as I'm reading through these books, some of the things that I'm seeing that I would like to just alert you to, if you're only looking at the printed version. If you're only looking at the printed version, you're seeing translations from people who are looking at the Pali text, which is the largest, most complete collection of the teachings that we have, but ultimately dates about 12 or 1300 years after the Buddha's death. So it dates back about 12 or 1300 years from right now. So whatever the Buddha said 2,500 years ago was remembered during his lifetime, and then after he died, at some point it was written down, and then it was copied and copied and copied and copied and copied for 12 or 1300 years until we got to the Pali Canon. And now what we have is we have people looking back at the Pali Canon, translating what it was that the Buddha was teaching into English language. Well, the people doing the translations have said themselves that they aren't enlightened. A fully perfectly enlightened Buddha speaks very differently and thinks very differently than an average human being. We're all the same, we're all equal, but having completely purified the mind as a perfectly enlightened Buddha would have, and having done that on their own with the deep, profound wisdom that they have, they would think differently and they would speak differently than an unenlightened being during his lifetime and surely now. So unenlightened people who are looking back at the Buddha's words that are 2,500 years old are essentially trying to figure out what it was that the Buddha was actually describing and what he was actually teaching. And I think that we've got some absolute stellar translations in the books that we're using, but there's some areas where I wouldn't necessarily chosen the same words that the translators chose. And some of those I've already alerted you to. I talk even in the group learning program about the suffering, this word suffering that's used all throughout Buddhist communities, and that I don't use that word, and I instead use discontentedness, and I explain why. I've also explained about happiness, how most people talk about the enlightenment or nibbana is ultimate happiness, and I explain why in the group learning program and in the book that I write, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Nibbana. I explain why I don't use that word happiness. And there's some other words that I gave you at the beginning of this program about a month ago in terms of using words like lust or rapture or some other things like this. And some of those words did need to change, and I've updated them, and that's why I'm publishing them through our Facebook group, through PDF documents. But now in these new books that we're getting into volume 3, 4, and 5, you're going to start seeing other language that we haven't talked about yet. You're going to start seeing where a person who's done translation is translating words that the Buddha used during his lifetime as the Buddha calling people foolish or stupid. There's even a place where the translator has chosen the word where he refers to another person as a hollowed man, essentially an empty man. Well, I bring this to your attention because a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha doesn't speak this way. And an enlightened being wouldn't speak this way. An enlightened being wouldn't refer to someone else as stupid or ignorant or look down on somebody calling them hollowed. And there's other language like this that you'll see as you progress. If you read these books and you took them at face value and you felt that this is how a Buddha speaks, being the perfectly enlightened Buddha, and your goal is to be enlightened, well, that means you might start calling people foolish or stupid, right? Instead, I would use words like unwise. This person has made some unwise decisions. I wouldn't say this person has made some stupid decisions, because this is talking down in a degrading way. Or this person is foolish. I may say, oh, this person has made some unwise decisions. I wouldn't call the individual or the person foolish. I also wouldn't refer to another person as hollow or empty, an empty man. I wouldn't refer to somebody that way. So I think it's important to understand that Gotama Buddha, in my view and in my opinion, a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha wouldn't speak this way. So as you're reading some of these translations, if things aren't quite sitting right with you, even though you've got the printed version, I suggest that you go ahead and download the PDF file because they're free. I'm giving them out to everyone for free. I suggest you download the PDF file and you read that one as well. And there are some students that have been doing that. They're reading the printed one and they're also reading the one that I wrote. And they're saying that, yeah, it's really helping them to see the difference in words, because not only words like this about how the Buddha relates to people, but there's also in this particular book, in this specific book, I felt this one was actually quite old language. I found out of all the 5 that I've worked on so far, this one was one of the more challenging ones in terms of the language, because I think a lot of the teachings in here have been translated by a bhikkhu who lived and was born in 1905. That was 115 years ago. And because of the impermanence of the English language, the language that they were using then versus what we're using now is very different. So I would encourage you not to just take what you're seeing here 100% on face value, and also to look at the books that I've translated and made available to you for free. The other thing that I'll share with you is that because the people who have translated these texts have shared that they aren't enlightened, that means that their own defilements, the craving, anger, ignorance, the self, and the ego, is going to be contained in their words and how they're translating. A fully perfectly enlightened Buddha isn't going to have craving, anger, ignorance, a self, and ego. So if you're reading these and just purely taking them at face value, then that means that you may walk away with the feeling that a Buddha has a bit of arrogance or a bit of ego or something like this. And it may, if you're not paying attention to it, it may actually arise ego in you. You might start walking out into the world thinking in a way that is being shared with you in these books because you're aspiring to be enlightened someday. And if you're reading these words thinking that these are in fact absolutely the words of the Buddha, then you might adopt some of this same phrasing and same language. Now, 90, 95, even maybe 98% of what's in here, yeah, I think it's absolutely stellar. But there's that 2% or that 5% that if you still practice that way, you would potentially have arrogance and ego, and this can really ignite or arise this arrogance and ego in you, in this self in you. So just be aware of that. And that's part of what these classes are for, so that you can come into the class and ask questions about certain teachings that you're seeing in these books and get clarification, and I can help you. And that's also what the personal guidance is for, that you can schedule appointments with me. That's also what the Facebook group is for. When I'm posting the teachings in the Facebook group, you can ask questions there. Now, what I'm posting in the Facebook group is what I've worked on, is what I moved from these books into what I've worked on. So in the Facebook group, you're seeing the translations that I would stand behind and say, I feel that these, in my opinion, are more accurate to what a fully perfectly enlightened Buddha would say and how they would speak, and the type of language that I would choose to use today. Because as I'm reading through these books, these people who did the translations have an amazing vocabulary, better than my vocabulary will ever be. And I actually have enjoyed reading these books because it's expanded my vocabulary. It's required me to go look and understand and look in dictionaries extensively and in thesauruses to see similar words extensively. So I really appreciate and have gratitude for them for the translations they've offered, which has helped me to expand my vocabulary. But when I'm doing the translations that I'm doing, I'm thinking about that student who is maybe living in Africa or India or South America or some other part of the world where English is not their first language, and they may not have access to the same type of resources that I have access to. So what I'm doing is I'm looking at this wonderful language that has been translated into these books for us, and then I'm moving it into kind of a more common language that is more applicable to an average reader, even a reader who has English as a second language. And even those particular readers, even with the word choices that I'm picking, they may have to actually go out and investigate and learn more about the English language in order to fully understand what the Buddha was teaching. And this can be helpful for their practice because, as you may be aware, one of the enlightenment factors is investigation. You would need to practice investigation of the Dhamma or investigation of the teachings in order to be enlightened. You wouldn't be able to attain enlightenment without practicing that enlightenment factor of investigation. Some other things that I'm seeing in the printed versions is the heavenly realm is referred to 3 or 4 different ways throughout the book and using different terminology. And the average reader, if you're only reading the printed version, you might not realize that that's actually the same exact thing. They're just using different words to reference the heavenly realm. I'm also seeing a few Pali words in these books as well. Like, well, I won't give you examples because I don't really speak Pali, but if you see a word and it's not in the English language, you know it's probably Pali. So what I'm doing is I'm going out and doing the research and looking for what do these Pali words mean, and I know what some of them mean, but most of the ones that are in here, they will have an English word next to it. So I don't really have to know Pali in order to help translate this, because there's ways to refer to things in Pali that are kind of common language. Even like the Buddha Dhamma Sangha, I'm translating that to Buddha teachings and community, so that people don't even need to know what a Dhamma and the Sangha is. But there may even be people that see the word Deva and don't know what Deva is. Deva is heavenly being. So I'm going to be translating that and moving that into more use so that people have a more common word. I just found out about this. Somebody asked me the question about a day or two ago. So while I'm doing a lot of translations and putting these into the books, as I'm teaching this to you guys in these classes and in personal discussions and in the Facebook group, as I'm seeing even the words that I'm translating or even the words that I'm leaving in there, like Deva, if people are asking me, David, what does Deva mean? Then that tells me that it's not a common word. It's not something that people understand. So therefore I need to change that to ensure that people really understand it. So there's kind of like this give and take going on, where I am translating things, I'm sharing it in these classes, but then this feedback loop is happening where through your questions and through what we talk about in classes and private discussions and in the Facebook group, it's giving me feedback of what things you guys are understanding, what things you aren't understanding, and that helps me to improve the translations even more so that we have even better translations going forward for this program and in the future as we teach this each iteration. So I want to thank you guys for asking questions. I want to thank you for attending this class. I want to thank you for whether you're doing personal guidance here and there, either in person or over the internet, or asking questions in the Facebook group, because your questions are, of course, helping you, but it's also helping me to be a better teacher, because I learn through your questions. I learn what things am I communicating and which things are really resonating and connecting with you, because the teachings are in the mind here and I understand them for practice and when I'm reading the books, but to communicate it to other people and have that really sink in a way that you can understand it and also practice it, there's a lot of work there in order to refine that. So kicking off a new program like this, there's that feedback loop that happens. And I just want to thank you guys for understanding that that's going on and participating and contributing to helping me to become a better teacher and to improve the translations so that you and other people in the future will have better translations to work with. So just keep those few things in mind as you progress if you're only looking at the printed versions. And when I read these 2.5 years ago or so, I read these and all the words, I mean, I just flipped them in my mind. It was no big deal. So when I actually started being interested in creating this program and sharing these books, and you guys started ordering them and I shipping them all over the world, in my mind, the books were quite good. It was just a few words that needed to be changed, and I gave that to you at the beginning of the program. But now when you guys are digging into it and you're starting to ask questions, I'm starting to see, going back through these books, that, oh yeah, this was just my mind that was understanding these teachings in a way that the average person isn't necessarily going to understand them. So that's why I decided to take the effort to move these into some updated language. And it is taking a significant amount of time, but I'm very pleased to do it, and I think it's just a really great offering to our community to do this and spend the amount of time that I am to update these translations. So now that I see that these do need to be updated, After I get them all updated and in the computer, what I'm going to do, and this is probably going to be a 6-month, 1-year project, is once I get them all in the computer, I'm going to go back and then add my thoughts at the end of each chapter. Just like I did in the Developing a Life Practice book, at the end of each teaching from the Buddha, I put author's thoughts. So I'm going to do that with each individual chapter of these books. So this is probably going to take me a good year to get through all of this. But once I do it, then I'm going to put it into PDFs, of course, and share all throughout the world for free. And you guys can take those PDFs, you can go print them, you can do whatever you like with them and share them. But I'm also going to put them on Amazon so that if people would like a really nice printed version, then it will be in Amazon as well, so that you guys can order it there and get a really nice bound book and printed similarly to the way this one is. So that's just a heads up that it's a good 6 months, a year down the road, but those are things that I'm working on here. And as you guys are asking questions in these classes and we go to a specific chapter, I've got 150, 200 chapters because I'm working on 2 or 3 books a week. I've got 150, 200 chapters in my mind that I'm working on. And I'm also reading them 2 or 3 or 4 times and combing through it and making sure that the language is exactly correct. So as you guys ask questions on the 22 chapters that you looked at this week, keep in mind that I'm looking at a whole lot more and looking at them multiple times throughout the week. So as you ask questions, in some cases, I may need to just read through a little bit and kind of refresh my memory about what it is exactly that you're asking questions about. If for some reason what I teach in class doesn't quite answer the initial question that you had, or if you have follow-up questions, be sure you don't stop asking questions until you get your question answered. Because in some cases, I might be seeing something and talking about one particular thing, but you feel it means something different, and you feel the interpretation or what the Buddha was teaching was actually different. I would prefer that you share that right there and then. Don't just assume that what David is teaching is 100% correct and accurate in all cases, because I'm sharing with you what I'm seeing in a particular Dhamma teaching, but the way that the Buddha taught is there's multiple layers of understanding to all of his teachings. And I might be talking at one particular layer, but maybe your question is deeper than that. So if you ask a certain question in this class at any time in the whole program, and I answer it, and I think I'm answering your question, and you think you're hearing my answer, it doesn't mean that what's in my mind, what I've communicated, what you're hearing, and what you put in your mind, it doesn't mean that was a clean transmission. I might not be speaking 100% effectively. You might not be hearing and understanding 100% effectively. I might not even be answering 100% exactly what it is that you're going for and what you're looking for. And this is practicing the enlightenment factor of investigation. Rather than just brush right past it, what you should do instead is, hey, I've still got questions here. I'm not sure that I understand 100% what David just shared, or maybe I disagree with what David just shared. I feel it means this. Then that's what this class time is for. Rather than hold on to these thoughts and ideas and let them accumulate, and then at some point kind of release them all, that's what somebody with craving would do, right? If you accumulate all these things that you think are happening and you accumulate all this in your mind, and then at some point in the future, you have this long list of things that you just say, here's all the things that I disagree with that you've said over the last 3 weeks or the last month or two. This is someone that's holding on to their thoughts, their ideas, their perceptions, rather than living in the present moment and dealing with each thing individually as it arises. So in these classes, it's a give and take, it's a back and forth. And that's why I invite most of you guys to come into Zoom, or all of you to come into Zoom, because there I think it's a better place to kind of have this multiple questions where as I answer your question, you might need to go multiple layers and have a back and forth where there's 2, 3, 4 different questions in order to get to the real aspect of your question that you were looking for. The group learning program that we do on Sunday and Wednesday has been very different. There's usually kind of one question and I answer it. But in this program, you really need to dive in. You really need to work with these translations. There needs to be a back and forth, digging in, and don't just say that whatever David says is the law, but instead interact and say, teacher, well, I kind of interpreted it this way. What do you think about that? Even though I just shared what I think this particular Dhamma teaching is all about, you can share what you think it is too. And we can collaborate and share our views and opinions and help you to further understand what it is that you're gaining and gleaning out of this teaching from the Buddha, because there's multiple layers to his teachings here. And if you don't have ego and you don't have a self and just thinking that you're right or I'm wrong or you're wrong, and you just say, okay, it's not about who's right or wrong, it's about let's just work together as a team, as a community. Let's work together as a community to dive in and truly understand what it is that we're looking at here, so that we can all walk away with a better understanding and improvement of our practice. Okay? Because remember, I've always told you, don't ever think that you're enlightened. Even when you've eliminated 100% discontentedness, don't ever assume you're enlightened. And even if you feel that you're in the first, second, or third stage of enlightenment, don't even assume that. Just always be working to gain more and more wisdom. And that's what I'm doing here, is gaining wisdom of how's the best way to actually share and present these teachings in books that I actually didn't write at all. So thank you all for your participation. And with that said, let's dive into the book and see what questions you guys have about chapter 1 through 22. We have Manal, who's the moderator today. You can put your questions in the comment section of Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom, and she will be able to get your question asked. If you're in Zoom, you can electronically raise your hand and ask any questions or follow-up questions that way. And if we can kind of gradually progress through the 22 chapters, that would be great. But if we need to bounce around a little bit, that's fine as well. So with that, I'll turn it over to Manal and see what questions you guys have.
Thank you, Teacher David. Good question from Alan, chapter 4.
All right, chapter 4.
Hi, everyone. I have a question regarding chapter 4. With the Dhamma and yourselves as your refuge, page 9 in the book. Last paragraph on the page, what is meant by the body in the body? Is this breath? What are the feelings and feelings, etc.?
Okay, this particular paragraph where it starts, here Ananda, a bhikkhu resides contemplating the body in the body, dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed craving and displeasure in regard to the world. He resides contemplating feelings in feelings, mind in mind, mental objects in mental objects, dedicated, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed craving and displeasure in regard to the world. So this is the translation that I added, and the words that you guys are seeing are just slightly different. But the question that Alan's talking about is still here, which is contemplating body and body. What this is referring to is the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And we talked about this in our class on Sunday this past week, where we talked about the 5 hindrances, Alan. You may not have participated in that class or seen the playback yet, but towards the end of that class, I talk about the 4 foundations of mindfulness. There's the body and body, which is the mind needs to be aware of bodily sensations. And then there's feelings in feelings, which is the feelings in the mind. So this is like painful feelings, pleasant feelings, feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant, anger, frustration, irritation, boredom, loneliness, the individual feelings. So you need to have an awareness of mind, of the individual feelings in the mind. And then mind in mind is the overall condition of the mind and how the condition of the mind is. And I'll give you some examples of this before we finish here. And then there's mind objects and mind objects. These are kind of, I think of them almost like placeholders. Okay, so let's give an example that we talked about in the class on Sunday. On Sunday, we were talking about the 5 hindrances. And one of the 5 hindrances is complacency. And I described complacency as lethargy or lack of energy, lack of motivation, kind of a dullness or laziness. Because if one is complacent in their practice, they're not going to be able to evolve and grow, right? And Manal asked a question on this before we even got to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. She said, well, how do we know where the lethargic condition is coming from? Well, the way that you know is based on practicing the 4 foundations of mindfulness. If you're practicing, if you understand the 4 foundations of mindfulness and you're practicing them, then you can sort through, where is this lethargic coming from? Where is this lack of energy coming from? Is it the bodily sensations? For example, have I just not eaten enough? Am I not drinking enough water? Do I have a medical condition like a thyroid condition or something else that is affecting the health of the physical body and its ability to have energy? So delineating, where is this lethargic condition coming from? Is it the body? Then moving on, contemplating feelings and feelings. Is it lethargic of the mind? Maybe the body is just fine, but the feelings in the mind are of a nature of laziness or not feeling energetic, right? And then there's mind in mind, the overall condition of the mind. Are you generally a person who's fairly lazy in other parts of your life, not just your practice of Buddhist teachings, but are you fairly complacent in all parts of your life? If your bathroom sink or your toilet was leaking, are you the kind of person that kind of addresses that right away? Or are you somebody who just kind of lets it leak for a while, doesn't really consider it, it's not leaking that bad, I'll get to it when I get to it? Does your mind kind of generally have a condition of complacency and laziness and dullness overall? And that's how the condition of the mind has been. It's not necessarily the body, it's not individual feelings that are kind of spontaneously arising, but it's the general condition of the mind throughout multiple weeks and months or even years of your life. Then mental object. The mental object in this case is the complacency itself. The mental object is complacency. And then because that mental object is there, that can affect the overall condition of the mind. It can produce certain feelings, and it can also affect the body as well. So what the Buddha is sharing as the 4 foundations of mindfulness is that in order to really practice mindfulness really astutely, you would need to be able to delineate all 4 of these individually and be able to identify where are the issues. What do I need to sort out? What's the real root cause? Because everything that we're practicing in the Buddhist teachings is all about getting to the root cause of the problem. So when we talk about discontentedness, we talk in right view about the problem isn't outside in the external world, it's the craving, desire, attachment, which is this unwholesome root. So one of the goals of a Buddhist practitioner, someone who's working their way to enlightenment, is to root out what is the real source of any particular problem that you're encountering so that you can see true reality. If you can see true reality and delineate the bodily sensations, the feelings, the condition of the mind, the mental objects, now you can very precisely target what do you need to do to remedy and rectify this. Do I need to address this physical health issue by ingesting better food, certain drinks, seeing a doctor? Do I have certain feelings that are just arising spontaneously and it's kind of not that big of a problem, that I'm generally a fairly active person, but these kind of feelings of laziness are just kind of starting to kind of perk up their head every once in a while, and I need to cut those off? Or is my mind generally of a condition of complacency and laziness? Or has this mental object of complacency taken such root in the mind that it's really multifaceted, and I need to really address the overall object of complacency in the mind through other means and remedies, which we talked about through the 5 hindrances in this particular example. So that's whatever you see the Buddha talking about, body and body, feelings and feelings, mind and mind, objects and objects, that's what he's talking about. Now, in this book, when I start you guys out, Developing a Life Practice, The Path That Leads to Nibbana, I describe mindfulness as awareness of mind, because you need to learn in layers. You can't learn everything all at one time, because it would just be overburden the mind and it would be too much for you. So when I start you guys out, I start you out with right mindfulness is just awareness of mind, and helping you to cultivate that and understand that and practice that on a day-to-day basis. But now that we're getting into the Buddhist teachings more deeply, I've been teaching in this online venue for the last 1 year. Now it's time to get deeper. And that's what this particular program's about. And that's why the 5 hindrances, we bring out the 4 foundations of mindfulness. And that's why here that we're studying the Buddha's words directly, you're starting to see more of what he talked about in terms of right mindfulness.
We have a question on chapter 6 from Judith.
Okay.
I have some questions on chapter 6 on white Dhamma, black Dhamma, and neither white nor black. What is the difference?
Okay. So what the Buddha is talking about here is he's talking about different people and how they're born into the world. And then based on their birth, which their birth is based on their previous karma from their previous lives, he's then talking about what you can produce as a result of your current life. So like this first one, where he says, and how Ananda breeds the black breed black teachings, right? So what he's talking about here is a person who's born in the translation that we're seeing is in a low caste, because during the Buddha's time, there was the caste system in place where people were classified based on their birth and where they were born in a kind of hierarchical society. And here he's talking about someone who's born into a low caste, somebody who was considered to be of a low caste, which is hunter, weaver, wheelwright, sweeper, a poor family where food and drink are scarce, life is hard, having clothing is hard to come by, they're perhaps perceived as being ugly and ill-featured, all of these different things that he goes through, and he describes kind of what people consider to be a low caste. And then he talks about what the results can be for that person having studied the Dhamma. And then he goes into saying if they have wrong actions, speech, intentions at the breakup of the body, meaning at death, this person, having been born in a low caste and also not practicing right intentions, right speech, and right actions, what would happen to them? And the Buddha is saying, well, this person would basically essentially be reborn into hell, because they were born in a low caste, they didn't do anything while they were here in this human life to improve the condition of their mind, and their next rebirth from the human realm is going to be into the hell realm. And I would like to share, before we go further, how the Buddha is not sharing this as a way to scare people into practicing his teachings. He's just telling you the truth. He's just telling you what's going to happen. At no time does he attempt to scare you or fear you, guilt you, or shame you into practicing his teachings, because the whole goal of his teachings is to eliminate that from the mind. So he's just telling you the truth of what's going to happen. And once he shares this about black going to black, he then shares black going to white, which is this same person who's born in a low caste But then during their life, they actually do practice right intentions, right speech, and right actions. And they improve the condition of their mind. Well, what happens to that person? Well, that person gets reborn into the heavenly realm. But again, that's not the ideal, because that being is still being reborn. They haven't attained enlightenment yet, and they can easily fall back down into another realm if they don't attain enlightenment in that heavenly realm. Then he talks about a person who's born into a low caste or black breed who can actually attain enlightenment. That he's basically sharing in this Dhamma that if you're born into a low caste family, you can still get to enlightenment. Because prior to the Buddha teaching, everybody was taught it was only this upper class, the Brahmin, who could communicate to God on their behalf, and they were kind of beholden or dependent on this upper caste of Brahmin who they needed to pay money to in order to have them go pray to the gods, and these low caste people would then go back to their life and work, come pay money and hope that their life would get better. Well, this bred a lot of corruption, and these lower caste people were having to pay higher and higher fees in order to get this service from the Brahmin. And only about 15% of society were Brahmin back then. So that means 85% of society were taught that you can't pray to the gods, only we can, the Brahmin. And the Buddha's teachings here on just these first three, breeding black to white, and black to nibbana, he's basically saying, hey, you can improve the condition of your life. It doesn't matter what caste you're in, whether you're in a low caste or otherwise. Then he goes into sharing if you're a white breed, meaning you were born into a high caste, meaning a noble, a Brahmin, or a householder who has lots of wealth and gold and plenty of good food and clothing and other things like this. And he says, yeah, from there, if you don't practice the right intentions, right speech, right actions, you will be reborn into hell as well. And then he talks about a high caste that generally kind of improves the condition of their mind through practicing right intentions, speech, and actions a bit. This person can be reborn into the heavenly realm as well. And then he says this white breed to nibbana can also be reborn into or can attain nibbana as well. So basically what this whole teaching is getting to is that it doesn't matter who you are, where you were born, what your karma was like before you moved into this current human birth, you can attain enlightenment in this birth. You can also be reborn in hell. You can also be reborn in heavenly realm. And there's other realms too, like the afflicted spirit realm and the animal realm. So he's basically saying that everybody has the opportunity to be reborn in every single realm. One of the myths that you will hear in Buddhist culture, and if you travel around and talk to enough Buddhists, they will share with you that some people believe that a household practitioner, someone like you living in a house that has a job and has a husband or a wife or a life partner or children, they will say that you can't attain enlightenment unless you become a monk or a bhikkhuni, an ordained practitioner. Well, here's the truth for you right here. The Buddha actually lays it out, both as a high caste, rich householder, and also as a low caste. So he says right here that a noble, Brahmin, or householder, right? And then by the time he gets to the end of this, he says that they can actually breed nibbana, meaning attain enlightenment. And he also says that down here when he refers to a low caste, someone who's born poor and doesn't have access to good food and drink and clothing and all that kind of stuff. He says right here, one born in a low caste, and that's essentially a householder, someone who's a wheelwright, a sweeper, a outcast, a hunter, a weaver. This is a household practitioner. He describes right here, can breed nibbana. let me roll this up, can breed nibbana. So the Buddha is saying no matter where you are in the world, no matter what your karma was before, no matter where you're reborn into this world, if you are human, you have the ability to attain enlightenment. That's what this is getting to.
Okay, I had a question on chapter 10.
Okay.
Consideration to go forth into homelessness. It states, household life is crowded and dusty. Life gone forth is wide open. It is not easy while living in a home to lead the holy life, utterly perfect and pure as a polished shell. Suppose I shave off my hair and beard, put on the yellow robe, and go forth from the home life into homelessness. This is alluding to perhaps the choice that Gotama Buddha, his path towards putting on a robe and leading a life of a householder's life. My question is that this can almost be a little bit misleading, not per se misleading, but most of the population of this world are householders, I would imagine, a majority percent. So why is there no mention of the middle path in this particular chapter?
Mm-hmm. What he's saying here in this paragraph that you're questioning is he's basically saying that it's a lot more challenging to attain enlightenment in the household life, which is what I've shared previously as well in the group learning program. As we progressed, or if as students ask me, David, is it possible to attain enlightenment in the household life? I say yes, absolutely, it's possible. It's more challenging. There's a lot more for you to learn. There's a lot more attachments. There's a lot more craving for you to overcome, but it's possible. If someone asks me, David, what's the absolute best chances for me to attain enlightenment in this life? It doesn't matter what I need to do. What's the best chances? I would say go ordain as an ordained practitioner. And I have said that to even people that are attending in this class. I see a couple of people that have asked me that question. By far, the ordained life, going into homelessness, which is what the Buddha is talking about here. When he's talking about going forth into homelessness, he's talking about ordaining. And if you ordain, you basically no longer need to own a house, own a car, buy clothes, buy food, hold a career, all of these things. You don't have to take care of your children or a life partner. It's all about your own practice, learning and developing your practice to attain enlightenment. Okay? That's solely what the whole purpose during Gotama Buddha's lifetime was, to ordain. People didn't ordain for any other reason other than to attain enlightenment. And this ordained path is like a womb. It's like a mother's womb, where the household practitioners are going out and working on a day-to-day basis. They're providing offerings of food, water, shelter, money, clothing, hospital, medical care, all these different things. And they're providing this womb for any of us to be able to ordain at a temple and now actually learn and practice the teachings in this womb. And it's not a permanent ordination, because Buddhists understand nothing's permanent, but if you want it to be permanent, it can be permanent, or if you would like it to be permanent, it can be permanent. But if you choose 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, however many years down the road to unordain, you can. So all the Buddha is sharing here is the way that I would share it is it's a lot more challenging in the household life to attain enlightenment, but it is possible, as we studied in that last teaching. If you're looking for the best possible chance to attain enlightenment, then that would be to ordain as an ordained practitioner. There's one caveat that I'll share with that, is ordaining in a particular temple, while it has the best conditions for you to potentially attain enlightenment, those people still have to do a lot of work in order to attain enlightenment. And it can also be a little bit misleading, because once you shave your hair and you put on the robe and you go into the ordained path, sure, you're not going to work, you're not going to have to work in terms of a career. You're still going to have to work. You're going to be sweeping the temple, cleaning toilets. You're going to be doing a lot of stuff, right? You're still going to have to work. And you're going to have to work on your own practice of learning and so forth. But you're going to be somewhat isolated in terms of the average everyday life. And you're kind of protected by this robe. So while you have better access and a lot more time to spend on learning and practicing to attain enlightenment, you also are somewhat protected because, like, for example, if you were here in Thailand, people would essentially be going around and wowing you all day. People would be respecting you all day. People would be showing gratitude and appreciation all day. Where living in a household life, one of the things that I got early on when I started teaching is I got people attacking me, being vindictive, telling me how horrible what I'm sharing is not what they learned, and people attacking. And this was actually so beneficial for my practice that I may or may not have ever gotten if I was in the ordained life. Because if I was in the ordained life with a robe and a shaved head, living in a temple, isolated, people probably, for the most part, would have just always been respectful to me. But having lived in this household life, sure, it's more challenging. Sure, it's more difficult. But having people attack me online, and occasionally they still do now too, it's actually so beneficial because I get to practice being calm, being polite, being friendly, being respectful, even when people are attacking me and telling me all kinds of horrible things based on their own craving, anger, and ignorance. And it's truly helped me tremendously. So while it is more challenging in the household life, and this monastic life or being ordained does provide you kind of a womb in which to develop in, there can be a little bit of dust in the corners of the mind of an ordained practitioner if all that ever happens is people just walk around showing respect and gratitude to them all day. Nobody actually ever challenges them. Not that I'm saying we should challenge them, but they're never in a situation potentially like I've been in where people have constantly attacked me for a year and a half, 2 years, constantly attacking what I'm sharing or attacking me as a person or all kinds of other different ways. And that really actually has helped tremendously. Whereas if I would have ordained right off, I wouldn't have got that same kind of development that I feel like I got through leading a household life. So you can attain enlightenment both ways. And the Buddha is just sharing here that it's more difficult as a householder. And I totally agree with him on that.
Thank you. Judith has a question on chapter 11, page 34.
Okay.
She asks, I don't understand this expression on page 34, the order will be rent.
Can you point me to it? Because my page numbers are different than yours since I'm looking at a different document. There's numbers here of paragraphs 1 through 5, I think. What paragraph is that in?
Let me check. Section 5.
Okay. So let me just read this out and then we'll eventually get to where Judith was asking, because I don't see it right off the bat. Moreover, bhikkhus, the bhikkhu reflects thus. Now the community lives in friendly fellowship together, finding comfort in one teaching. But the time will come when the community will be fractured, and when that happens, not easy is it to turn to the Buddha's word. Not easy things are the forest wilderness, the outland bed and seat to seek. Before that state come, unwelcome, undesired, unloved, listen. I will put forth energy towards that time, even to attain the unattained, to master the unmastered, to realize the unrealized, and of that state possessed. I will dwell comforted, even though the community is fractured. So it looks like I probably have translated it differently than what's in the book.
That's correct.
So Judith is saying that's on page 34, is it?
if you want, I can read the sentence as it reads in the book.
Sure, go ahead.
Moreover, monks, the monk reflects thus: now the order lives in friendly fellowship together, finding comfort in one teaching. But the time will come when the order will be rent. And when that happens, not easy it is to turn to the Buddha's word. Not easy things are the forest wilderness, the outland bed, and seat to seek.
Okay, I got it there. So I translated that as fractured. What the Buddha was talking about here, and if you go back and look at what this word rent means, it's not rent like paying your rent, although that is what it means. There's a secondary meaning to this word rent that is more kind of an older English way of referring to fractured. So what the Buddha is talking about in this paragraph, and he talks about this in other parts of this same Dhamma 1 through 5, is each paragraph is basically explaining certain things that are going to come up in your life, and he's kind of giving you a heads up like, hey, be sure that you learn and practice the teachings before this particular situation occurs, so that way when it does occur, you will be able to dwell comforted. So here in this 5th paragraph, he's saying there's going to come a time when the Sangha, the community, is going to be broken up. And that happened almost immediately after his death. I don't know how many years afterwards, but it started fracturing pretty quickly. And he even predicted that we were going to be where we are today, where there's so many different fractions and people would be arguing and bickering about who's right and who's wrong. And this is why when people tell me that I'm wrong about the Buddhist teachings and they're right, I know that that's exactly what the Buddha said would happen. So there's no reason for me to get angry because somebody disagrees with me about how I share the teachings, because this is everybody kind of looking at the same teachings and coming to a different conclusion. One person isn't right and one person isn't wrong. It's about what works for you. And if we can live in disagreement and peacefully coexist, then that's the real goal. The goal isn't to determine who's right and who's wrong. But here in this particular Dhamma, or this particular paragraph, the Buddha is talking about the community breaking up, and that when he was alive, it was a cohesive group. It was everybody coming to him for teachings, and people were more and more and more teaching during his life. But then as the community breaks up, he's saying, be sure that you've learned the Dhamma very deeply before that happens. Because once that happens and things start breaking up, it's going to be a lot harder for people to learn, because that nucleus of wisdom will start to fracture and fall away. And he says, for somebody who's done that, somebody who has learned before the community has broken up, they can dwell comforted, even though the community is fractured, because they would have already acquired the wisdom that they needed before the fracturing started happening. And he talks in the preceding paragraphs about other conditions of the world and situation that if you learn and study the Dhamma before this occurs, you can then dwell comforted. He talks about being sick or old, and he gives some other indications of things that might happen to you throughout your life. Here's one where he talks about famine and crops or no famine, no crops. I think one of them he talks about being difficult to acquire goods or something. Oh, when you're young, he's saying, okay, when you're young and you're in the prime of your life, before you get to old age, that's the time to really learn and practice these teachings. About 8 months or 10 months ago, we had somebody on one of these classes that was like 24 years old and saying that she was getting advice from her father not to learn and practice the Buddhist teachings until she got old. Well, I shared at that time that's actually opposite of what the Buddha taught. What the Buddha actually taught is to learn early in life, because the more early you learn and get a handle on this craving, anger, ignorance, the self, and the ego, the more you eradicate that stuff early in life, the better, because then you're going to have a much better life throughout your later years. And having done this work early in life during your youth, the craving, anger, ignorance, the self, and the ego wouldn't have accumulated as much during say, the first 20, 25, 30 years of your life as it will once you're 60 or 80 years old. You will have accumulated a lot more conditioning. And this is one of the things that I've shared about, like, my son, who's 8 years old and who's learning these teachings very early in life. And even all throughout Thailand, all these children that are learning these teachings so early, they grow up with these teachings, and it has a real dramatic effect on their life, because they're able to live peacefully because they learn it so early before there's a lot of conditioning. So if you're finding it difficult at age 25 or 30 or 35 or 40 or 50 to learn and understand and practice these teachings, that's because you didn't have the opportunity to do it when you were young, and now it's a lot more challenging for you. But that doesn't mean it's unsurmountable or that you shouldn't do this. You should learn as much as you can and share it with your loved ones, the people close to you, your children, so that they can kind of get a head start on life. And having done so, and kind of allowing these teachings to permeate in our culture, with more and more young people learning these teachings, they will start permeating in our culture. And this is where we'll slowly see the conditions of people's minds, therefore the condition of the world, gradually improving.
You move on to chapter 12, at the
Sure.
very beginning.
Okay.
Amina asks, related to the first sentence, 2 things, because I have realized: to be discontented in good states and to not shrink back from the struggle. How is it beneficial to be discontented in good states? Can you explain the intention here?
I'm not 100% sure what he's meaning when discontented in good states. Let me try to read a little bit here. 2 things, because I've realized. Let me read it out loud. So the title of this chapter 12 is "Do Not Decline, Continue the Struggle." 2 things, bhikkhus, I have realized: to be discontented in good states and not to shrink back from the struggle. Without shrinking back, bhikkhus, I struggle on thus. Gladly would I have my skin and sinews and bones wither, and my body's flesh and blood dry up. If only I may hold out until I win what may be won by human strength, by human energy, by human striving. By my earnest endeavor, bhikkhus, I won enlightenment. I won the unrivaled freedom from the bond. And you too, bhikkhus, do not decline the contest, but struggle on, saying to yourselves, "Gladly would I have my skin and sinews and bones wither, and my body's flesh and blood dry up, if only I may hold out until I win what may be won by human strength, by human energy, by human striving." Then too, bhikkhus, in no long time shall win that goal for which the householders rightly leave home for the homeless life, even that unrivaled goal of righteous living, realizing it for yourself, even in this very life, and having reached it, you shall reside therein. Wherefore I say unto you, bhikkhus, thus must you train yourselves. We will not decline the contest, but will struggle on. Overall, this Dhamma is essentially saying what I've said, which is never give up, right? Never give up on learning, reflecting, and practicing the teachings in order to attain enlightenment through this wisdom. That's what the overall thing is saying here, is don't ever give up. If it feels like a struggle, if it feels difficult, if things get challenging, because they will, especially when you're working to get rid of the ego and the self, it's going to want to revolt, and it's not going to want to admit that it's even there, and it's going to become very defensive. And it can be a struggle to really get through, breaking through some of these aspects of the mind, and that's the struggle that he's talking about. But this part where he's talking about to be discontented in good states, what he might be talking about here, and I don't know because he doesn't give any indication here, is when you're transitioning from the completely unenlightened mind off the path to now you're on the path and you're still unenlightened. You're not yet enlightened. What he might be talking about here is that when discontentedness arises, don't feel guilty. Still have a good state of mind. When discontentedness arises, don't feel shameful. Don't feel like it's your fault. Don't feel like you did something wrong. Try to look at the brighter side of seeing that red light of discontentedness on the dashboard and look at it as a good thing. Thank goodness my mind became discontent when this particular thing happened, because now I know I've got craving and now I can fix it. So for example, back to what we were just talking about, if I had put on orange robes and shaved my head and just been protected in the temple all the time and isolated, I might not have ever gotten to the little dust in the corner, and discontentedness might not have ever arose in certain situations because people went around respecting me all day. But if discontentedness can arise and you can be like, oh, thank goodness, let me work on this. Don't shrink back from the struggle. Shrinking back from the struggle is kind of pushing away. If your teacher tells you you have ego or you have a self, it shouldn't be, no, I don't have ego, I don't have self. It should be, oh, really? Why do you say that? Can you share more? Right? Because if you shrink back from the struggle and you defend yourself, then there's still a self there. If you say, no, you're only saying that I have a self and ego because I'm disagreeing with you, you're pointing the finger to somebody else and saying, no, it's your problem. Someone without a self and without an ego, when somebody's sharing with you that you have a self and ego, they would say, oh, that's interesting. Can you share more? Or however they decide to phrase it. Someone who's really working on the ego and not shrinking back from the struggle, they would be interested to hear what their teacher has to share with them, for example, if they're pointing out any particular thing that they're noticing. So this is the only thing that I can think that this is, but you can try to interpret that. And if what I'm sharing with you helps you, that when your mind is discontent, this is where sometimes I used to say, sometimes when my mind used to get discontent, after 5 minutes, 10 minutes, I would just start laughing because I'd be angry and I'd be frustrated and I'd be trying to, in my mind, rationalize how it was somebody else's fault. But then the teachings would kick in and I would realize, oh, this is my craving. This is my desire. This is my attachment. And I would just start laughing at myself. Like, look at how the mind is trying to rationalize how everything is everyone else's fault. So that's one thing that I can share with you, is that he could be saying to be discontented in good states, meaning look at the brighter side of discontentedness and how it's arising to your mind that, yeah, you still got work to do here. And this can be a really good thing. Don't fall back from it. Don't run from it. Don't hide from it. If somebody tells you, if your teacher tells you, you still got work to do, don't run from that and shrink back from the struggle, but lean into it. I talked about this several months ago, how if there's a particular problem, what the unenlightened mind's going to want to do is it's going to want to run away or walk away from the problem, thinking that that's going to actually solve the problem. But it doesn't. It's just aversion pushing out this thing from your life. And now the problem is the mind is uncomfortable with that disagreement. And what I talked about is, instead of walking away from the problem, is actually stop, turn around, smile, realize that you're wrong, realize that you've done the wrong thing and trying to walk away, and actually walk towards the disagreeable. Because the mind's going to want this agreeable things all the time. It's going to want agreement through the six senses all the time. And as soon as it confronts and gets confronted with disagreement, it's going to want to turn and walk away. But what you should do is you should turn and walk towards the disagreement and say, help me understand more. And this is what somebody would do who's not shrinking back from the struggle.
Amina comments, yes, that is helpful, David. Thank you.
Good, Amina.
She continues to ask on chapter 15, if a bhikkhu delights in them, welcomes them, and remains holding to them, delight arises in him. With the arising of delight, punna, there is an arising of discontentedness, I say. She asks, is it possible to delight in something, welcome it, and then instead of holding on to it, release it, and thus avoid the consequential discontentedness? In a previous class, we discussed enjoying the beauty of a sunset view of a mountain. Could that be considered a brief welcome delight that was then let go?
Yes, it's possible. And I looked at this, and now that I'm hearing this question, I'll probably go back and change it. I was on the fence of whether to change this or not. What this is talking about is pleasant feelings. It's not talking about enjoying something. What it's talking about is essentially what I was just sharing, is that through these 6 senses, the mind is going to want the agreeable. It's not going to want the disagreeable. And what the Buddha is saying is that that is discontentedness as well. So let me read this. With the arising of delight, there is the arising of discontentedness. Another way to say that is, with the arising of pleasant feelings, there is the arising of discontentedness. Okay? Puna, there are forms cognized by the eye, sounds cognized by the ear, odors cognized by the nose, flavors cognized by the tongue, tangibles, this is bodily contact, cognized by the body, mind objects cognized by the mind that are wished for, desired, agreeable, and likable, connected with central desire, and provocative of craving. This is where the mind's longing for the agreeable, the desired, the likable. I only want things that I like. When I hear something that I disagree with, the mind wants to run, right? That's what the unenlightened mind does. And what the Buddha is saying here is, if the bhikkhu delights in them, meaning that you're just, oh, I really enjoy all this agreeable stuff. If I really find all this pleasing happiness, and I welcome them, I'm like looking out for them, I remain holding on to them, delight arises in him. These pleasant feelings arise in him. With the arising of these pleasant feelings, then puna, there is a rising of discontentedness. So here, this is a very clear teaching where suffering isn't the right word. And this is why I use the word discontentedness. Because what the Buddha is saying is that pleasant feelings are discontentedness as well. That we should ensure that when we're enjoying something, that we're not inviting it and welcoming it and holding on to it. Because it's that holding on to it, it's that craving, it's that clinging that the mind is then going to cause itself discontentedness. So the answer to your question, Amina, is yes, it's possible. But the Buddha is kind of giving you a heads up here that when you are experiencing the agreeable and that which you like through the senses, don't try to hold on to it, because that's impermanent. You're not always going to get that. And if you do hold on to it, then you're inviting in discontentedness into the mind.
We move on to chapter 17.
I'm going to take a note to go back and update that. Go ahead, Mana.
Okay. Judith asks on chapter 17, our page 46, on the cessation of delight and the cessation of suffering, what would cessation of delight look like? I see that to some extent, delight helps us to choose the food that's most conducive to sustain life, for example. So if you could talk about the difference between delight and the rest of the things like infatuation or attachment.
Yeah, so what you've got here is essentially a continuation. This is probably part of one whole long sutra, where the one that we just talked about, chapter 15, is the Buddha kind of raising to people's awareness that, hey, if you hold on to delight, in other words, let's use that word, pleasant feelings. If you hold on to pleasant feelings, that is discontentedness, right? So if you continue in the whole sutra, probably, because we've got the same names here and the same content, what he's now getting to is how to eliminate that. So he first talks about the problem, and then he talks about the solution. And he does this in his Four Noble Truths and in other parts of his Dhamma as well. So here what he's talking about is if a bhikkhu does not allow delight in them, meaning, let's say we use an example from somebody who was talking about in a previous class about looking at a mountain, and you look at this landscape and you're just sitting there, you're just like, oh, wow, this is just such an amazing landscape. And this delight is arising in them, and they're feeling this delight, or what I call happiness, excitement, elation, right? And this is arising in the mind. These feelings are arising in the mind because one of those aggregates, one of those feelings in the mind are coming up, and your mindfulness with your awareness of mind, and you acknowledge as you're sitting there looking at the landscape, and you're noticing that happiness, excitement, and elation arising. The way to practice to get to the end of discontentedness, or the cessation of discontentedness, is as you see that delight, or as you see that happiness, excitement, and elation arise, cut it off. Doesn't mean you're wrong, doesn't mean you're bad, doesn't mean that when you're enlightened, you're not going to enjoy the view. It just means that if you're feeling the sensations in the body, this goes to the 4 foundations of mindfulness. If you're feeling the bodily sensations start to peak because the feelings in the mind are starting to experience this delight, then there's the potential for the overall condition of the mind to now crave this pleasantness. And as long as the mind is doing what the Buddha is saying here, is welcoming them, really looking out through these 6 senses and welcoming this delight, then the mind's going to be craving. It's going to be looking and aspiring for all of these pleasant feelings. But what you should know is you are going to have joy through enlightenment, but you're not going to be looking for it in an outward direction. But if you stand in front of that landscape and you feel this happiness and this excitement and this elation, and you just allow it to obsess the mind, then when it's gone, you're going to feel sadness or irritation or something else. And then the mind's going to be looking for that next opportunity to get that same happiness, excitement, and elation. And the mind's just going to be cycling up and down. Whereas if you notice in this transitionary period, if you notice that delight is coming into the mind, that happiness, excitement, and elation, and you're noticing the sensations in the body, you're noticing the feelings, and you cut it off, then you want to allow it to change the condition of the mind, where now the condition of the mind is craving those pleasant feelings. So you can cut off that delight and just sit there and enjoy the view, and just know that it's impermanent and it's not going to last forever. And then after you enjoy it, just move on to the next thing. And when you do this enough times over multiple things, whether it's something that you eat, whether it's a view, whether it's music that you hear, whether it's some fabric on the body, any of these 6 senses that we're talking about, wherever you notice that happiness, excitement, and elation arise, cut it off. One of the other teachings that the Buddha talks about is he says there's danger in allowing the mind to experience this, right? Because once you allow the mind to become obsessed with this happiness, excitement, and elation, this delight, now it becomes all-encompassing and it starts to crave it. And it's looking externally for this pleasure. So An enlightened mind, having gone through this period where when you feel delight, happiness, excitement, and elation arise, and you cut it and cut it and cut it, but you can still sit there and enjoy the view. Eventually, when you cut it enough times over multiple months and years, eventually, as you move closer and closer to enlightenment, you will come to that same view and be like, very nice. Look how beautiful this is. Really nice. And then you'll move on. You won't try to hold on to it. Like, oh my goodness, honey, look at this view. Can you imagine how beautiful this is? Oh my goodness. I wish I had a view like this at my office or at our house. We should get a view like this, right? This is craving. This is clinging. This is wanting something so badly versus, oh, that's really beautiful. Wow, look at that. So nice. And then move on to the next thing. So you don't want to get so absorbed into this delight and pleasant feelings that it obsesses the mind, because that's where the danger is. Because now the mind being obsessed with these pleasant feelings, it's going to start searching for pleasant feelings through all of these six senses. And you're trying to train the mind to not look outward for these pleasant feelings that are conditioned on some experience, but you're trying to train the mind to be inwardly peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy, where it can look at something or taste something, it can enjoy it, but it doesn't hold on to it, craving it over and over and over again. So with a particular food, I have food that I absolutely love to eat. I actually enjoy. I can't love food, but I really enjoy food, certain foods that I get. And just the other day, a certain vendor made this food, and I told my wife, I said, order like 8 of them. That'll last me for like the next 3 to 5 days. Just order 8 of them. And I know that, okay, she had the food, I ordered it, I'm going to be able to eat that for 3 to 5 days. But then on the other side of that, when I'm no longer able to eat that particular food, I'll just get another food and something else that either I enjoy or that maybe I don't enjoy so much. If the mind craves a particular food and wants it all the time, then when it can't get that particular food, the next time it eats, it's going to, oh, this is so horrible. Oh, I don't like this food. It's just no good. It's not as good as that other stuff that I had, right? And this is where the discontentedness sets in. Whereas if you look at food as just, what is the purpose of food? It's to nourish the body. That's all it's for. It's not for us to necessarily take pleasure in it. Although there are foods that we can enjoy, and even when you're enlightened, you can enjoy food. But the problem comes when the mind holds on to it. It craves it. It wants it. It's got to have it. And then when it doesn't have it, that's when it becomes discontent. You've got to train the mind, no matter what food you're eating, no matter where you're eating it, that the mind can be peaceful and content with it. And one of the ways you train yourself to do this is if you sit down and you eat food and you don't like it and the mind's like, this is horrible, just force yourself to eat it and train the mind to eat it. Now, if it's going to potentially make you sick, of course, don't eat it, right? But if it's just something that's a little bitter and you don't like bitter, or if it's just a little bit salty and you don't particularly like salt, still eat it and just train the mind. This is to nourish the body. That's all it's for is to nourish the body. Because if the mind's always looking out for pleasurable food, then when it encounters food that it doesn't like, i.e. the disagreeable, when it doesn't have the agreeable food, when it meets with the disagreeable, it's going to be discontent. So when you're in situations where the food isn't to your liking, then I suggest you still eat it for a period of time, 6 months or a year, as long as you're training the mind and you sit down and you take a bite and you notice, that's not good at all. If you're noticing those feelings with right mindfulness, you've got to eat the food. And this is where you've got to be honest with yourself. If you take a bite and you're like, I didn't like that so much, I'm not going to eat that, right? You've got to be honest and know where you're at on this path and know whether that's really a good thing for you to set it aside, or should you be eating that food and just train the mind to be content regardless of the taste of the food. And this is how you have to actively engage with the mind, actively train it. And eventually, when you eliminate all this discontentedness, and even though you're not going to admit to yourself or anyone else that you're enlightened, you know that you've eliminated all the discontentedness and you don't have any discontentedness about food whatsoever, then go back to the foods that you enjoy and try to make an effort to only eat food that you enjoy. But there's going to be times where you can't get food that you enjoy. But because you did the hard work of training the mind during that time with the bitter, salty, or whatever kind of food, when you get food that you don't particularly like, you'll still be able to eat it and the mind will still be content in that situation. Because you know it's just one meal, it's impermanent, and you can eat again in a few hours and you'll be just fine. You're just trying to nourish the body. But you have to take the mind through this journey of 6 months, a year, 2 years, however long, until you've trained the mind. Stop wanting such pleasurable food. This is where I talk about the mind as being like this third entity. And it's almost like that mind is trying to control you to do certain things. And you're trying to say, stop trying to control me to only eat the food that you like. You're going to eat this food whether you like it or not. And then you just eat it. And over the course of many months and potentially years, you train the mind to just sit there and eat it regardless. And yeah, you're going to be eating some horrible things sometimes that you think are just horrible. But that's part of this path. That's not shrinking back from the struggle. You're going to have to struggle a little bit. If this path to enlightenment was so easy, everyone would already be enlightened, right? So yeah, you're going to have to put your mind in certain situations where you don't like it. And that's the whole reason why you need to be in those situations, because the mind doesn't like it. It's discontent. It's irritated. It's annoyed. And the only way for you to confront that and root out that annoyance and root out that irritability is to put the mind through it. Don't shrink back from the struggle. See the goodness in the discontentedness. Thank goodness this person served me this food. Yeah, I don't like it. But you know what? Now I know I don't like it, and I'm going to eat it 3, 4, 5 times a week until I convince the mind, or once a week or once a month or whatever, until I convince the mind to just give up and submit. You're going to eat it, and it's to nourish the body. And then eventually, once you train the mind away from that, now the mind's liberated. It's no longer controlling you. You can eat anything at any time, and the mind's always peaceful.
Thank you, Teacher David. That was very beneficial for myself. So oftentimes I've used the word delightful as almost a holding spot for reflection and appreciating, having delight in not just food, but the arts or music. So from what I understand today, as long as you have delight without craving or attachment, then that delightfulness is okay. Is that correct?
It's not about what's okay or not okay. It's about understanding what delight is and then not holding on to it. If you look at what delight is delight is pleasant feelings. It literally translates to that, is pleasant feelings. So I'm kind of thinking about maybe going back and changing that here. But I also like this word delight because it kind of helps us to have this conversation, because we wouldn't be having this in-depth conversation without it too. So what the Buddha is saying is, I've highlighted it here. Not delighting in them, not welcoming them, not like inviting the delight in and say, come on in, move in, delight, come on in. Like, yeah, come obsess this mind, and trying to hold on to it. If you do that, that's the mind's craving for delight. So this is where I talk about conditioned happiness versus unconditioned joy. But I could very easily have described this as conditioned happiness and unconditioned happiness. Conditioned happiness and unconditioned happiness. Conditioned happiness is discontentedness. Unconditioned happiness is enlightenment, where the mind's always happy, not based on any particular condition. Same thing goes here. Conditioned delight, where the mind is experiencing pleasant feelings based on conditions, is discontentedness, and it's dangerous, and the mind's not yet enlightened. But experiencing delight not based on any conditions, that it's just always delightful, or you don't hold on to the delight and you don't welcome it in, but you just enjoy the view, you enjoy the food, and when it's over and it's done. The mind's no longer outwardly searching for it. So let's just say, for an example, we have 10 of us at a table eating, and we're eating family style, where we've got all the food out, and there's one particular dish that it's like, whoa, that's amazing, that's so good. Well, if you're delighting in this, you might be selfish and start to hoard the food, right? And this is selfish of you to do that. And you're just trying to please your senses and enjoy the food so much, but you're overlooking sharing it with other people because maybe you really enjoy it. You're welcoming in this delight, you're holding on to it. This is going to produce unwholesome decisions for you. Whereas if you take a scoop of the food and you're like, taste it, oh wow, that's delicious. Hey, have you guys tasted this? I think, if you would like some, it's just amazing. And now you're sharing it with generosity with other people. That's the difference here, is that the problem isn't the delight. The problem is that if you remain holding on to it, as the Buddha is talking about, that's where the unwholesomeness comes in.
Judith has a question on page 50, chapter 19. If you could talk a little bit about the difference between aversion and the revulsion that the enlightened person experiences.
Where exactly are you seeing that, Judith? I think I translated revulsion to something else. Let me look at the book.
It's on chapter 19.
Chapter 19. What page?
On page 50 and 51.
50 and 51. Okay.
Yeah, after the another sutta.
Okay. And what sentence or what paragraph?
It says, seeing thus bhikkhus, the instructed noble disciple experiences revulsion towards the eye, towards forms, towards eye consciousness, towards eye contact, towards whatever feeling arises with eye contact as condition, whether pleasant or painful or neither painful nor pleasant. Experiencing revulsion, he becomes dispassionate. Through dispassion, his mind is liberated.
Okay. And what was the question that you had, just to understand it in general?
Because I see revulsion must be very different from aversion, because aversion is one of the fires, and this is very dispassionate. So if you could talk a little bit more about that.
Okay. So the way that I'm translating the word revulsion is indifference, where the mind is unaffected. It's indifferent. So here's the translation that I've got. Seeing thus bhikkhus, the instructed noble disciple experiences indifference towards the eye, towards forms, towards eye consciousness, towards eye contact, towards whatever feeling arises with eye contact as conditioned, whether pleasant, painful, or neither painful nor pleasant. This is essentially talking about what we were just talking about, which is being unaffected by the arising of pleasant feelings, painful feelings, or feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. So I use the word indifference, and then that second sentence, or right after that paragraph is, experiencing indifference, he becomes unaffected. Through being unaffected, his mind is liberated. So when the I sees certain forms through contact with the I, and then these conditioned feelings of painful feelings, pleasant feelings, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant arise, what the Buddha is saying is you should be indifferent to them. You should be unaffected by them. Through being unaffected by them, now the mind is liberated. Because if you allow the mind to become obsessed with these pleasant feelings, or you allow the mind's condition, the condition of the mind, to be affected by these painful feelings, or feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant, if you allow the mind to be affected, now the mind's not liberated, because it's being controlled by this anger, this rage, this hostility, or this happiness, this excitement, this elation, this boredom, loneliness, shyness. The mind's being affected by it, the condition of the mind, and now you're making decisions through this anger and frustration and irritation. What the Buddha is saying here is you should experience indifference, that you essentially remain in the middle, unaffected by any of these feelings, and then by being unaffected, the mind becomes liberated. And when it is liberated, there comes the wisdom. So as you observe more and more that when these painful feelings arise, you don't hold on to them, you cut them off and let them go. When that happiness, excitement, elation arises, that delight, you don't hold on to them, you cut them off and let them go. Keep the mind in the middle. When the boredom, loneliness, shyness arises, you don't hold on to them, you cut it off, you let it go. Be indifferent to them, be unaffected by them. And then you will see the wisdom that having done so and done it this way, this wisdom will start to come into the mind that it's never beneficial for you to allow painful feelings, pleasant feelings, or feelings neither painful nor pleasant to arise. And the more you cut these feelings off, more, then eventually the mind gets so well trained, you have such mental discipline that those feelings never arise ever. Because the mind has this wisdom. And that's where the mind is liberated. That over the course of months and years, as these painful feelings, pleasant feelings, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant arise, and you keep cutting them off and cutting them off and cutting them off because you have such awareness of mind, you keep cutting them off and bringing the mind back to the breath and not hold on to them, the mind becomes more and more wise that it's no longer beneficial for you to allow these feelings to come into the mind, because the mind sees the danger in it. The mind sees, if I allow these feelings to come into the mind, then the mind can be obsessed by this painful, pleasant, or neither painful nor pleasant feelings. And if I allow that to happen, the mind's going to experience discontentedness. And when you gain this wisdom over a long period of time, then eventually the mind never has any of these discontent feelings arise. And that's the wisdom that it accumulates. So that's what the Buddha is saying here, is when it is liberated, there comes wisdom. And sometimes there's the reverse like this. Of course, you have to have the wisdom in order to get the mind to be liberated. But the mind needs to be cultivate this wisdom of cutting off the feelings. And the only way that it's going to do that is if it has this awareness of mind, right mindfulness, and if it has this right effort, where it takes the effort, where it sees these feelings arise, it applies effort to abandon those unwholesome qualities and arise wholesome qualities. And then the mind will function more and more naturally through this wisdom, because the mind will see it unbeneficial to ever allow painful feelings or pleasant feelings, or neither painful nor pleasant, to arise. And I can't remember whether it's in this book or another one that I've been working on this week, where the Buddha talks about obliterating this discontentedness and cutting it off at the root and obliterating it. So depending on where you are in your practice, anger might arise, and it might be 30 minutes or an hour before the wisdom of the Buddhist teachings kicks in, and you're like, silly me, another discontentedness, craving, desire, attachment, silly me. Then it might be a half hour, and you figure it out. And then it might be 10 minutes, then it might be 5 minutes, and then you finally, silly me, and then it might be a minute, and then eventually it'll just be a momentary arising of the discontentedness, and boom, you can cut it right away, and you just cut it. And that's what the Buddha's talking about obliterating it at the stump, at the root. And I can't remember if it's in this book or another one that I've been looking at. But the more and more you do that, where this time that the mind becomes discontent gets shrunken down more and more and more, because you're more actively catching it. Your mindfulness through your meditation gets developed so well that you get such awareness of mind that you're cutting it off, because you're noticing it much sooner and sooner and sooner. And the wisdom kicks in sooner and sooner and sooner. And you've refined the mind so well that it becomes so close to the middle that eventually it gets to the point where the wisdom is there and permeating in the mind so much that these feelings never even arise anymore. Does that answer your question, Judith? Is that thumbs up?
Yes, thank you very much.
Okay, good. You're welcome.
We have two separate questions related to the word contact on chapter 21.
Okay.
Page 56, chapter 21. Nick asks, can you define contact? This omnipresent concomitant mental function, is it simple as body contact, touching something? Or is it something more actual, touched, because it rolls into pleasant feelings, painful feelings, and feelings that are neither pleasant or painful? For example, you cannot touch boredom. You feel it, but you do not touch it. Besides the general following of the Eightfold Path, is there a specific way to get rid of feeling? How do you vanquish contact? How do we cease the appropriate contacts to get the corresponding feelings to cease?
Yeah, so what the Buddha is talking about, this goes back to dependent origination. What the Buddha is talking about here is all of these six senses, eyes, nose, tongue, ears, bodily contact, and the mind, what arises feelings is contact. That's the dependency. If there wasn't contact, then there wouldn't be the arising of these feelings. This is where, like, sometimes people look at blind or deaf people as, that's a really challenging part of their life. And I agree, it is really challenging to live with blindness or deafness or both. But in terms of attaining enlightenment, those people will actually probably find it a bit easier, because they're not having to deal with contact through those senses. So what contact is literally seeing a form with the eyes. The eye comes in contact with some form. Beautiful motorbike. Oh, wow, I'd love to buy that motorcycle. Or, oh, look at that beautiful human being. I wish I had that, right? Or smell, some arising smell, some contact, either painful, pleasant, or neither painful nor pleasant. You can smell a very horrible odor, like a sewer. Oh my goodness, that's horrible. It creates discontentedness in the mind. Oh, did you smell that person's perfume? Oh my goodness. Wow, that smelled so good. Oh, do you smell that food mom's cooking? Oh, I can't wait to get down there and have that food, right? It can arise pleasant feelings. Or it can just be like a bland smell where it's neither painful nor pleasant and the mind's just bored, right? So we could go through each individual sense, all six sense bases. Through contact of these six sense bases, there are feelings of painful feelings, pleasant feelings, and feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant that arise based on contact through these six senses. And that's where the feelings come from, is this contact. Without contact, there would be no feelings. right? There has to be contact through these six senses in order to get to a feeling. And that's through dependent origination. The Buddha explains that. Now, you had a second part of your question. Was it about how to eliminate the painful, pleasant, neither painful nor pleasant?
Yes.
Is that correct, Manal?
Yes. How do we cease the appropriate context to get the corresponding feelings to cease?
Okay. So let's just take, I like using, I always use extramarital affairs and, desire and craving of sexual contact, because it's one that I know pretty much most people can relate to. So let's use this precept that is really far away from everything that we're talking about, but it all connects back. Basic precept, third precept about sexual misconduct and not having sex with certain people in order to remain loyal and committed to your partner, right? Well, let's just say your mind has craving for sexual contact. You have feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. When you first got together with this person, pleasant feelings, amazing, right? Because the mind was so much craving for this person. But after a few years, maybe your craving has subsided, and now it's like neither painful nor pleasant. It's kind of like boring for you because the mind is searching externally for this pleasure. It hasn't been trained, right? So now it's kind of boring, and now the person decides to go and look on Tinder or some other dating app or go to the local mall, and with the eyes, contact with the eyes of seeing beautiful human beings or seeing Tinder app, and now this is arising pleasant feelings in the mind, and eventually maybe you even start putting speech and actions behind this, which is going to cause a lot of unwholesome results for you in your relationship. This is kind of the way things happen. And this is why craving is such a big problem, right? The Buddha gives these precepts just to kind of generally help you. But what it all boils down to is the things that we're talking about right now: dependent origination, the three feelings of discontentedness, and this contact, that the eyes are craving contact in this particular case, but also the physical body through sexual contact, right? So the way to eliminate this is to eliminate the contact. Is if you know you're on these dating apps and you know you're going to the mall to look at people, and that's going to excite the mind and bring this delight, rather than welcoming this, rather than holding on to this like we studied earlier. What the Buddha is saying here is you've got to eliminate the contact. You've got to eliminate the Tinder app. You got to get rid of that. You got to, not you, Nick, because I don't think that you would do this, but if you were, it's okay. That's just where you are in your practice. And there's people that are at that place that, if you're doing that and you've got a partner, but you're still kind of out there searching and looking around, this is because the mind is discontent. It at one time craved these pleasant feelings, and now maybe the mind's got these neither painful nor pleasant, this boredom that is set in because it's still searching externally for pleasure. And there's even a component to these sexual partners that it's not just the eyes, it's not just the bodily contact, it might be the smell, it might be the voice, it might even be the mind. Oftentimes the mind is very stimulated by having a new partner, right? And what the Buddha is saying here is you've got to eliminate contact, because the feelings are all rooted in contact. That's the real source. So since you know what that source is, and that's the root, like I talked about at the beginning, you've got to get back to the root of the problem. The root of the problem is the contact. That's what he's guiding you back to. We've talked mostly about craving, desire, attachment, because that's the beginning layer of teaching through the Four Noble Truths. Is we talk about how craving, desire, attachment is the cause of discontentedness, and eliminating the craving, desire, attachment, that mental longing with strong eagerness will eliminate the discontentedness. And this is totally true. That's why it's called the Four Noble Truths. But that's just the first layer of teachings. Once you get into this layering deeper and deeper into the Buddhist teachings, you start realizing that, hey, yeah, it is craving, desire, attachment, but through dependent origination, you trace that back and you see that it's actually contact through these six senses that ultimately leads to these feelings and this craving of continuing to look externally for these pleasant feelings, painful feelings, neither painful nor pleasant. All of these feelings are arising because of all of that stuff. It's not just as simple as craving, desire, attachment anymore. But that's the Four Noble Truths. That's the beginning class, right? If you were going to become a stock trader or an economist or a martial artist, because I know Nick is a martial artist, they didn't start you out doing jump roundhouse kicks, right? You started out with just basic punching, basic kicking, right? And then the layering and the layering and the layering. And by the time you went up in jiu-jitsu, man, you started doing all these amazing things that were based on these very basic teachings that you got in your early training. So you can look at what I'm shared in the Developing a Life Practice book in terms of the Four Noble Truths, the Eightfold Path, the 5 Precepts, all of these other things. These are like the first layer of teachings. And now we're going deeper and deeper and deeper. So to eliminate the painful feelings, pleasant feelings, neither painful nor pleasant, yes, you have to eliminate craving, desire, attachment. But backing that up even further through dependent origination, you have to eliminate contact in certain situations where you're no longer looking at Tinder or you're no longer going to the mall to see these beautiful beings that are walking around, perhaps. So this is just one example. And if I didn't quite answer your question, Nick, you're welcome to ask more follow-ups, but I think we explored that one pretty good. But if there's something else, let me know and we can talk some more here.
I believe this to be the last question, Teacher David, from Amina, again on chapter 21, related to contacts.
Okay.
Are the contacts referring to the sensory doorways? So too, these three feelings are born of contact, rooted in contact, with contact as their source and condition. In dependence on the appropriate contacts, the corresponding feelings arise. With the cessation of the appropriate contacts, the corresponding feelings cease.
Yes. Whenever you're seeing contact, we're talking about through the six sense bases or the six sense faculties. That's where contact comes. The six senses or the six sense bases, the six sense faculties, I also refer to them as the doorways to discontentedness, because all your discontentedness in the mind is going to come through one of these six doorways. And it's contact through these six doorways that is going to produce these feelings of discontentedness, either painful, pleasant, or neither painful nor pleasant, through these doorways. So that's 100%. And when you look at dependent origination, you see that the six sense bases are almost like right in the middle of that. And that's the real aspect of what you're trying to do, is train this mind to not long through these six senses for these pleasant feelings. Because if it does, all these pleasant feelings that it's experiencing through these six senses, that's all impermanent. And if you allow it to long through these six sense bases, then eventually, because all these things are impermanent, now it's going to experience painful feelings or feelings that are neither painful nor pleasant. You're inviting in these other feelings. We just think that we're chasing happiness, and we just chase happiness, and that's what we're going to get to, and everything's going to be wonderful. But if you understand the Buddhist teachings, you see that by chasing the pleasant feelings through these six sense bases, it's going to ultimately lead to, yes, happiness, excitement, and elation, but that's discontentedness, because it's longing externally through these six sense bases, and eventually it's going to get to painful feelings or neither painful nor pleasant. So you've got to train the mind to be inwardly peaceful, calm, serene, and content with joy.
Those are all the questions we have today.
All right. You know what I realized? I realized that I never shared to Zoom the the book. Okay, this is the first time I did this. So I was supposed to do this for all of you guys in Zoom. I've thought the entire time that I was teaching class that I was sharing the screen, but I just forgot to click that because today was the first day that I was supposed to do that. So I apologize for all of you guys in Zoom. I was reading this out and showing it to you and highlighting and thinking that Judith and Nick and all of you guys could see what I was doing, but I guess you guys had your books. And if you've downloaded the PDF file from our Facebook page, then you would have had this there to perhaps go through. So apologize for that. We'll work on that next time to make it a little bit better. And thank you for sticking in there to continue to learn, even though I wasn't sharing that. Those of you guys on the live stream, you guys were seeing the book as I was scrolling through it. So wonderful questions, everyone. I think you're starting to see how things are fitting together a little bit, right? If you just have one class and it becomes really difficult and you give up, you shrink back from the struggle, then you've given up. But you guys haven't done that. What you are observing is that as you make your way through these books, that, yeah, there were some more challenging chapters in the second book, and now we're getting to some other parts, and more these chapters and these teachings will become more clear and more a clear picture of how these teachings all integrate will become clearer and clearer in the mind. And there's a process that's going on here. You're learning teachings intellectually, right? You're reading the book, you're coming to class, you're asking questions, you're learning intellectually and bringing the teachings into the mind intellectually. Then either in class or at home while you're reading or after you've read or a few days here and there, you're reflecting. You're thinking about what you read, you're thinking about what you heard in class, you're thinking about, all the different aspects that you're learning intellectually. You kind of have internalized it intellectually, but now you're kind of steaming it over. You're kind of looking at it. You're kind of reflecting on it. And there might be some more questions that arise as part of that reflection. And that's where you post in the Facebook group, you send me a private message, or you schedule a private appointment, personal discussion. Because as you're reflecting, more questions might come up. At some point, you've got to start practicing this stuff. And you probably already are to a certain degree. Because when you start practicing it, this is what changes the condition of the mind. Somebody can learn intellectually, and they might know the right things to say. They might know the right answer, but their practice hasn't been influenced. They're still practicing in a way that isn't in line with what an enlightened being is going to practice, because the condition of the mind hasn't changed. You've just brought in this intellectual learning, and you might even have been thinking about it for a bit, but you're not yet practicing it through your actions, right? Your intentions, your speech, and your actions have to all be in sync. There can easily be someone who studies for a couple of years. They know all the teachings intellectually. They can say all the right words. They can say all the right speech, but their actions aren't where they need to be because the condition of the mind hasn't truly changed. They might be going through the motions. They might be learning. They might be reflecting. They might be meditating extensively. But in the daily life of developing their life practice, of actually applying the teachings in daily life, they're not yet applying them. And that's where the rubber meets the road, so to speak. That's where we as teachers, we as the community here in Thailand, we can observe somebody's conduct in their mental discipline, and we can observe whether somebody still has a self or not. We can observe whether somebody has ego or not. We can observe if somebody still has conceits or arrogance or ill will or sensual desire. And this is how members in a community know when somebody's attained enlightenment or not, because we can observe it. If you're well trained in these teachings, we observe through people's conduct, through their practice, how they're practicing on a daily basis, not just 1 week, not just a couple of months, not even just a year and a half, 2 years, but we're not looking to judge, but in terms of working with you as a student and a teacher, one of the reasons why that's important is because we build a relationship, and I start observing how your intentions and your speech and your actions evolve over time. And then as a teacher, I'm providing you guidance and showing you where certain things need to be improved. And if as a student, you reject what the teacher is sharing with you and saying, no, I don't have a self, or no, I don't have ego, then you're not fully taking in the benefit of having a teacher. You're not fully evolving your practice. So there's a process here. It's intellectually learning, it's reflecting, it's asking questions, seeking guidance, seeking understanding, moving this into practice where it literally changes your day-to-day decisions. Still your free will, still your individual decisions that lead to certain results, but it's your conduct and your mental discipline. It's not just the intellectual wisdom. It's not just the having the right answer through speech. It's through the actions and the conduct that you can observe somebody's mind has moved closer and closer to enlightenment, or actually is enlightened. Okay? So as you're learning this, yeah, it's a challenge. Yeah, it's a struggle. That's the words that the Buddha used. Yeah, it's a struggle. There's a lot of work. There's a lot of effort. But don't shrink back from that struggle. Continue to move forward gradually, consistently, not in a hurry. There's plenty to learn here. And just gradually learn day by day, moment by moment, and just move more and more and more of this into your daily practice. You get discontent. Okay, but don't get discontent because you're discontent, right? That's not going to help you. What the Buddha was sharing in that one Dhamma is like, maintain a good mental state even when you see that you're discontent. But don't get discontent because you're discontent. That's just making the problem worse, right? And this is where I used to tell you that sometimes I used to get angry, irritated, even when I was trying to get these teachings all in order. But then eventually I would just laugh at myself. And that was one of the healthiest things that you can do, is just laugh. Just laugh at yourself. Like, look at you, you're discontent because you're discontent. Right? So have fun with it, enjoy it, keep learning, keep reflecting, and keep practicing. Next week on Saturday, we're going to be doing the remaining part of this book, which is chapter 23, all the way to the end, which I think is 44, if I remember correctly, but basically the last half of this book. So you can be reading that this week. And if you haven't read the first half, read the first half. And as I'm posting in the Facebook group, you can see the updated translations there. And if you would like to download the PDF of this to see the updated translations, you can do that too. Even if you've already read the first 22 chapters in the printed book, you might be interested to download the PDF and see the translations that I've updated. And I'm going to update that some more over the coming days now based on this class, and I'm seeing the kind of language that's connecting with you guys and helping you guys. And this is helping to draw it out of my mind as well, because these teachings are in the mind and I'm practicing them on a daily basis, but it's very different to explain it to somebody. And sometimes that takes time to build up that proficiency of being able to explain it to somebody. So thank you for your dedication. Thank you for your commitment to learning, growing, and practicing these teachings. If you're going to join tomorrow on Sunday for the group learning program at 9 o'clock Thai time, we're going to be studying the first 2 steps of the Eightfold Path: right view and right intention. So we're going to be going through the 3 universal truths, the 4 noble truths, and we're going to be talking about right intention, right? And that's all we're going to be discussing in that class. And then on Wednesday, we're going to be doing breathing mindfulness meditation. And because we talked about martial arts a little bit, this is essentially like a black belt. Not that any of us are necessarily black belts, but This is like a black belt in Kung Fu or karate, still going back to practice the basics and learn the basics. There's no harm in going back and learning the three universal truths, the four noble truths, and these other teachings, because now that you're getting into some more of the intermediate to advanced teachings, hearing the basics all over again is actually really beneficial for the mind, because you're going to hear them in a different way now that you understand some of the more intermediate to advanced teachings. So I encourage you guys, if you have the time, either live or on the replay, to continue in the group learning program, because you're going to hear things differently now that your mind is taking on some more and more teachings from the Buddha's words directly. You're starting to learn dependent origination and the four foundations of mindfulness and some of these other things. So until I see you next time, either Sunday, Wednesday, or Saturday, have a really wonderful rest of your day, and remember to treat everyone polite, kind, friendly, and respectful. Because when you do that, you're just making more and more good results for yourself, because you're putting a lot of good, wholesome things into the world. I'll see you next time. Sawadee khap. Thank you again for watching. Enjoy your meditation. Look forward to seeing you online and answering any questions that you might have. Thank you so much.